The front office is starting to shape up. The Charlotte Hornets are reportedly hiring a new GM. We talk about it today. Locked On Hornets.
You are Locked On Hornets, your daily Charlotte Hornets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
In a minute, cuz we live.
It's Locked On Hornets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team every day. Thanks for making us your first listen. We're free and available anywhere you get your podcast, and that includes YouTube. Hold on. The news is going to have to hold on for just 1 second. We got to help out our people. This episode is brought to you by Grammarly. We appreciate them as always. Grammarly is a writing tool that can help you support you from your start to finish. With one click, you can easily brainstorm, rewrite, and reply with suggestions based on your context and goals. Go to Grammarly.com/podcast to download for free today. Almost not going to give it to you quite yet. There's Doug Branson. You can find him on his Substack writing about this.
It's happening.
Every Hornets Boxscore.com, and you can listen to me talk about it some more on WFNZ every weekday from 12 to 3 p.m. We are flying by the seat of our pants. We had a completely different show lined up for you. Nay, we were doing an actual show, a completely different one that we had to scrap and throw away in the trash, never to be seen again, because we were talking about the potential candidates, but instead we have some breaking news, and here it is. Adrian Wojnarowski, as of this recording about 10 minutes ago, he reports that the Charlotte Hornets are planning to hire Brooklyn Nets executive Jeff Peterson as the franchise's next head of basketball operations, and the sides expect to reach a contractual agreement soon, sources told ESPN on Thursday. Here's more. At 35 years old, Jeff Peterson is completing a meteoric rise to oversee the Hornets front office and become tasked with revitalizing one of the league's traditionally underperforming franchises. New owners Rick Schnall and Gabe Plotkin chose Peterson to replace Mitch Kupchak, who is moving on from GM into an advisory role with the Charlotte Hornets. So there's the news. Doug, we thought it might be Trajan Langdon. In fact, that's probably who we would have bet on for a long time. But instead, it's Jeff Peterson coming over from the Nets organization. Your initial thoughts?
Well, this is what happens when we bet the buzz, folks. I mean, if you've been paying attention to this show long enough, you know that if we pick them, that it's probably not going to go that way. So, but Jeff Peterson was the name that I think has been the most talked about name of all of these names. We've been hearing this name from the very beginning, from Jake Fisher and from a lot of sources, and some of these other names sort of showed up late to the game a little bit, but Peterson was the guy. And if every hire is a reaction to the previous hire, I mean, this is the example that you would have, because you're going from Mitch Kupchak, who is of a different generation, to somebody that's younger than me. This new head of basketball operations that they are hiring, and a lot to get to. We got to do some more work on Jeff Peterson, but I did want to read something from a Nets.com interview that he did this was all the way back in 2019 when he was first hired with the Nets, and they asked him what his philosophy of team building was, and he said this: "One of the biggest things is you want to make sure you put as much emphasis on getting the right people in the program, whether that's from a staffing standpoint or a roster compositional standpoint. They've worked tremendously hard to create a culture here with good people who want to work and who want to be part of something bigger than themselves and can sacrifice and are unselfish, people who can fight through adversity. That aligns with how I think as well." So there is a little bit of insight into the mind of Jeff Peterson, who at that time I guess was like 30 years old, like just a little teeny tot. But now he's in the big show now, and he gets to run his own show. And it's so difficult, as we've talked about these candidates, to really get a sense of exactly how these people are going to operate, because all of these names, whether it be Langdon or Peterson or any of these different names we've talked about, have been the guy that reports to the guy. They haven't been out there trying to steal someone else's head of basketball operations. But all of the names that they've interviewed are people that have been well respected in the league, and that includes Jeff Peterson. So I'm glad that the Hornets went out and got one of those names. They got their guy, and it's a young guy, and it's a guy that I hope is going to have a visionary philosophy about what the Hornets can do. I think for too long, this front office has inexplicably been very explicit about what the Hornets cannot do, what they're limited by. I'm hoping by going out and getting someone that is young, that is hungry, that has wanted this for a long time and has been in some different organizations, that this guy's going to come in and say, actually, I have a bold vision for what this team can become.
Mm-hmm. It was always going to be tough. It's so easy to see now that the hire is here, but it's so easy to see now the fact that it was always going to be tough to put a wedge in that relationship between Rick Schnall and Jeff Peterson and be able to get the job, right? Like, especially if we don't know exactly what Trajan Langdon is responsible for in New Orleans. He's responsible for a lot in the sense that he's helped, but also David Griffin being a part of so much of what they've built. Maybe you just don't know about everything Langdon's done. Same thing with Jeff Peterson. And so when you just aren't exactly sure of the responsibilities, and then hopefully you're getting all of these in the interview process. But the bottom line is that Jeff Peterson spent a long time with the Atlanta Hawks, where Rick Schnall was the minority owner for quite some time. He started out as a scout with the Atlanta Hawks in 2013-2014 season. He became the operations coordinator, basketball operations coordinator, director of scouting, and then the assistant GM before he was hired as the assistant GM of the Brooklyn Nets in May of 2019. So he was with the Hawks for quite some time, then going over to the Nets. The other thing that's interesting here before we move on and start to dissect a little more of this here, Doug, it's the fact that the Nets, it's been like at least rumored that they might be looking to move on from Sean Marks. And so if that was the case, then they would just promote within, right? I wonder if the Charlotte Hornets if they were going to hire Jeff Peterson, then they had to act fast, because the Nets just might decide to move on from Sean Marks and then hire within. And the Hornets didn't want them to do that if Peterson was their guy. So here he is, the new GM of the Charlotte Hornets, not officially official, but the agreement is supposed to take place at some point today. So he's a young one. You're right. 35 years old, but I do hope he has a visionary type of approach with the Charlotte Hornets. Last thoughts here before we move on.
Well, let me just say, I think that Jeff Peterson made the right call in taking this job, because I think this is a more desirable job now than it's ever been, especially after that trade deadline that he didn't even have to work. You get hired post trade deadline. You can focus on the draft. Your team is a lot better all of a sudden, and that Nets situation seems to be heading for disaster. It doesn't seem like that just kind of top to bottom, that organization understands what it wants to do. Whereas I think so far, Schnall and Plotkin are really getting this team in a particular direction, moving it and a direction that I think both of us are really positive about right now. And so I think that's good for him. He also dodged a major bullet, which is he interviewed for the Detroit Pistons top job in 2020 and didn't get it.
Yeah.
That has to be one of those few moments for Jeff Peterson as he looks back.
Well, and by the way, so I guess Trajan Langdon was another GM or right-hand guy that was poached away from that staff and then goes to New Orleans from that Nets staff. And so there might have been the relationship there as well. Did Langdon have time with Atlanta? I wasn't sure about that, but of course I know he's been working with New Orleans for quite some time. So it's Jeff Peterson. What are some of his next duties, a part of the front office here in Charlotte? We'll talk about that coming up next on the Locked On Hornets podcast.
Don't go to sleep on the Hornets just yet.
What's on the to-do list? Simple as that. We'll get to it in just a moment. Before we do that, I want to tell you this episode is brought to you by eBay Motors. Our partners at eBay Motors have teamed up with Locked On Fantasy Basketball host Josh Lloyd to bring you some of the best fantasy picks each week, all season long. Whether you're prepping for a daily draft or scouting the waiver wire, every week we're going to provide you players that are guaranteed to fit on your roster. So let's see who Josh has picked out for us on this week's eBay's Guaranteed Fit Fantasy Picks of the Week. Speaking of a Hawk, DeAndre Hunter, he's shooting so well, and with Trae Young out, the touches and shot attempts will spike. Benedict Mathurin, my guy, as Doug likes to dub him. Mathurin is in career best form and posting numbers in multiple categories. We have concerns of consistency, but while he's rolling, he is worth using. And then how about Corey Kispert? At some point, Kispert should find himself in a larger role permanently. He's shooting well with the Wizards, and they should start using him more. Josh Lloyd from Locked On Fantasy Basketball is going to help you win your fantasy championship, and eBay Motors knows a championship team is about each player being a perfect fit. It is the same with your vehicle. So again, thanks to eBay Motors for always helping us out here, a part of the Locked On Podcast Network. And make sure you go to eBay Motors. eBay Guaranteed Fit, only available to U.S. customers. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. More Locked On Hornets ahead.
Before we get to the to-do list, Walker, I have a question. I don't really have an answer for the question. I don't think you have an answer for the question. It's just a question that I'm going to toss out into the universe, and we'll find out the answer to it in a few weeks or what. And that question is, what does this hire of Jeff Peterson mean for some of the lesser-known names in the front office that have a tight affiliation with the previous owner, Michael Jordan? So I'm talking about guys like Buzz Peterson, who was Jordan's roommate in college. I'm talking about guys like his brother, Larry Jordan, who is in sort of the front office scouting. I mean, there are Jordan ties everywhere when you go to the team roster of the front office, right? What does this mean? Did they hire Jeff Peterson to come in and slowly transition out of that? Or is this the start of a cleaning house in the front office? That's the question that I have, because if it's the start of a cleaning house and they say, all right, Jeff, you're the guy, we're going to let you lead it. It's not going to be a Steve Clifford situation where we hire you as head coach, but you got to keep half of the coaches that Borrego had. If it truly is a transition to a new era, then I'm going to be super excited and super positive and super hopeful about the direction of the franchise. But if it's just, hey, we need you to babysit the previous era until some contracts run out, then I'll be less excited.
Buzz Peterson is the one that's most interesting because of how close he is with Michael, as you mentioned, being the college roommate and being also a guy that I have to imagine had a pretty heavy hand in decision-making for quite some time. Buzz Peterson was a name that we would hear constantly with it. And it would be constantly in a way that it was always like under the radar, but his name would just slip in with some of these big decisions that the Hornets would make. I would bet if Mitch Kupchak is going to an advisory role, it would make sense that Buzz Peterson has some even made-up title to be a part of the organization, but not have any real power, right? Like Mitch Kupchak, maybe he's a good enough scout, and he still loves doing it. He still loves the talent evaluation process, and he's in Jeff's ear saying, hey, I really like this kid overseas. You should take a look at him and draft him in the second round. And because there is a history there of hitting, maybe Jeff listens, maybe he doesn't. I don't know what kind of made-up title you might give Buzz Peterson, but it would not shock me because of his ties, not only to the Carolinas, but also within the organization for quite some time. So, yeah, you're right. I don't have the answer. Nobody does. But if there is anybody keeping their job, we have Whitfield already out. Fred Whitfield is gone, and maybe because of some health issues and, something that he was doing was he was battling cancer for, I think it was over a year, and it was, speaking of under the radar, we just didn't know. And so he steps down. That was kind of hard to figure out how much of that was due to health concerns, it just being his time to step away, or if the fact that Michael Jordan was a majority owner anymore and he sold the majority stake to Gabe Plotkin and Rick Schnall. So it feels like there's this big transition, but there's also the, hey, we'll allow you guys to still eat at least just a little bit. You just aren't going to be making decisions anymore.
It wouldn't shock me either, but that's because of my history with this franchise. I want to be shocked. I'm ready to be shocked. Please, Rick Schnall. I need a Schnall shock. That's tough to say. I knew it was tough to say when I started it, and I did it anyway, but I want a Schnall shock.
Okay, what about shock and Schnall instead of shock and awe? Shock and Schnall? Yeah, it didn't work.
Yes,
anyways,
I want a shock and Schnall campaign on this front office, and let's clean slate. I'm willing to see out the Steve Clifford coaching staff, because there have been major improvements when you gave him some NBA level players. There have been major improvements on the defensive end of the floor. I'm willing to see that out, but I think in terms of the front office, yeah, clean slate. Let's go.
All right, to-do list. What do you think is number one here, Doug? So they've already done a decent amount to try to, get out in front of whatever next year is going to look like. You don't have P.J. Washington. You don't have Gordon Hayward. You don't have Terry Rozier. Massive roster overhaul with the replenished bench. You even have assets. You even have a top 10 pick on the way. So you're right. It has never been more valuable. This job has never been more valuable than what it is right now. In fact, probably in a better spot than we would have guessed post-trade deadline, right? If we're talking 2 first-round picks, lottery protected, unprotected, 27, 28 from Miami, and then top 2 protected from Dallas, all 2027. So it's probably in a better spot than we anticipated post-trade deadline. What's next on the to-do list?
Yeah, I think, well, the very next thing on the to-do list is that top 10 pick, figuring out who you're going to select. I think you've got to nail that pick because the franchise is a little behind in terms of talent development because you let Book Knight go, you let Kai go, you really boinked that whole draft. And so, that has ripple effects in terms of talent development and guys that are ready to step up. That you alleviated some of that by bringing in guys in the deadline and moving on from certain characters. So you've done a little work already. But for Jeff Peterson coming in, he's got to figure out how to nail this upcoming draft. And so, get the scouts out there, pick up the work that Mitch Kupchak. That'll be one of the benefits of having Mitch Kupchak hang around is that you don't, have to clear the deck of all of that stuff that's happened, pre-draft. So that'll be good. I think that's job number one. But long term, you've got to figure out what you're going to do with those 2027 picks. Do you plan on making them? Do you plan on packaging them? Who do you want to package them for? Start scouting the rest of the NBA to see if, poke around Mikal Bridges in Brooklyn. And that's his old gig. So if anyone's going to know if Mikal Bridges is up for grabs, it's going to be Jeff Peterson, I think. So you got to start figuring out what that looks like in terms of how you're going to move pieces. And then, I think step number 2, Walker, is evaluating what you have in these guys that you've brought in this previous trade deadline, who you feel like would be a long-term match for the LaMelo, Brandon, possibly Miles experience, and who you feel like could be packaged with those 2027 picks. Because, I think that's one of the big benefits of bringing in all of these NBA level players who have now elevated their game because they weren't exactly able to do that in their previous locations, is now that, Mann and Micic, I know you're falling in love watching them right now, but they're going to become valuable as well. And you package those kind of players, flip them for either even more assets or players that could turn this into a retool pretty quickly.
If you look at the Hornets payroll, then there's one contract that sticks out as to, we need to figure out what the hell we're going to do with this guy pretty immediately. And that's Miles Bridges, who agreed to the qualifying offer and is now only here for 1 year before he gets to unrestricted free agency because they did not trade him at the deadline, maybe because they wanted to see if they could keep him long-term, they being Plotkin and Schnall. But even if they did want to trade him, Rich Paul, Miles Bridges, Rich Paul is Miles' agent, and they said, no, we're not going anywhere because we have that power to veto. And so if the draft is June 26th and then NBA free agency is June 30th, yes, technically the top 10 pick is going to be the first thing that Jeff Peterson, I think, really is, spearheading. That's going to be his first real decision. But then immediately after that, it's going to be Miles Bridges. I think that's going to be the next big move, and then you start to figure out what to do with those 2027 first.
And it's such an interesting decision because Jeff Peterson doesn't have any emotion attached to that, right? Mitch Kupchak was the guy that drafted Miles Bridges. Gabe Plotkin was part of the ownership group during Miles Bridges' ascent as a Charlotte Hornet when they were on the verge of giving him a near max contract. There's a lot of emotion tied up into that. But Jeff Peterson is going to come at it from a completely different perspective. And so it will be interesting to see how that affects the negotiations when they do come up. Because look, Miles Bridges is an unrestricted free agent. They have the Hornets don't have any more leverage to play other than, hey, this situation, your role on this team, you're playing with some of your best friends and LaMelo Ball and so on and so forth. But ultimately, this is going to come down to how much Charlotte is willing to invest relative to other teams. And we know that other teams have been sniffing around Miles Bridges. But Peterson is coming at this, which I would assume is coming at this from a completely objective perspective. And so I think that changes things dramatically.
Well, yeah, and final thing, even with those 2027 picks, what's nice about this is that you are trying. I don't want to say thread the needle because you are overhauling the roster, what you've done at the deadline. But, I mean, you do have time to use those picks. So it's not like you have to make a decision right away. You can figure out, okay, what is this team in Brandon Miller's second year? What does LaMelo's health look like? And then that becomes a decision. You know, what the hell do we do building depth around LaMelo even more so? How do we get, if he gets hurt again next year, like, then you have a lot bigger questions to ask about than just the depth for LaMelo. But there's a few things. It's still a good spot to be in, though, if you're a Charlotte Hornets GM compared to what it had been. Let's move on. One more segment to go. Coming up next on the Locked On Hornets podcast.
Don't go to sleep on the Hornets just yet.
How did we get here? We continue to check boxes off of the to-do list for Jeff Peterson and really tell you the information as we get it. We're all flying by the seat of our pants here on Locked On Hornets. We continue to do so in the last segment. This episode is brought to you by Grammarly. No matter what kind of work you do, how you communicate is key. All those emails, reports, and presentations are equally important to the collaboration needed to get things done, and Grammarly can help. Grammarly is your AI writing partner to help you communicate more effectively and efficiently so you can make a bigger impact at work. 96% of Grammarly users report that Grammarly helps them craft more impactful writing. It works across 500,000 apps and websites. You can save time with one click and go from editing drafts in hours to seconds. 93% of professionals using Grammarly Premium report that it helps them get more work done. And plus, data privacy and security are woven into the very foundation of Grammarly. Grammarly is the gold standard of responsible AI with 14 years of experience and just about every IT certification under the sun. So make a bigger impact at work with Grammarly, and you can sign up and download for free at Grammarly.com/podcast. That's Grammarly, Grammarly, Grammarly.com/podcast. Easier said, done. More Locked On Hornets ahead. So just to give people a little peek behind the curtain as to what took place today, we had Jake Madison on of Locked On Pelicans to talk about Trajan Langdon as a potential GM. Not we were going to. We already did the full interview. It was very good. We actually got some useful information. It was great. And Jake has been doing this forever. And then as we start the show, okay, as we do the interview, and then we start the first segment, that's when the tweet comes in from Woj saying, no, Jeff Peterson is going to be that guy. And so that's how things work sometimes, Doug. We just got to do an emergency pod.
And I'll just say, I apologize for nothing to Jake. You stole our team. You personally, Jake Madison, I hold you personally responsible for the Hornets leaving and going to New Orleans. So I apologize. Fans of the show are used to hearing me not apologize. So I continue to not apologize for anything.
I was about to say that's very on brand for you. That's on brand Branson, not apologizing for anything. All right, you have a quote from Sean Marks on Jeff Peterson?
Yes, his former boss. This was in an Athletic write-up in 2022. And this is what Sean Marks had to say about now Hornets head of basketball operations, or at least reported head of basketball operations, Jeff Peterson. Quote, "There are people who can have honest conversations peer-to-peer. I could have a conversation with the GM, players can talk to players, coaches talk to coaches. Jeff is a rare breed that can talk across platforms. So he can have a very honest conversation with the player. He's had that multiple times, get the message across. He's not afraid." Unquote. Walker, we talked about Langdon, the Alaskan assassin, having that as a benefit for him, that he was a player, he could talk to other players. And while Jeff, I'm not sure about I don't think he got any NBA run. He did win an ACC championship with Florida State. He is a player that could talk to players.
Well, his college, I remember looking this up a while back when his name first popped up as a potential candidate. He actually, I think, transferred 3 different times before the real transfer era. Yeah, so I'm bringing up his college stats right now.
Ahead of his time.
He was at Iowa for the first 2 years, averaged 10.5 points per game in 08-09, went to Arkansas as a transfer, and then went to Florida State in 2011-2012. So this guy was in college when I was in college. It's ridiculous. So anyways, yeah, Jeff Peterson, well-traveled during his college basketball days.
And worked his way up. I mean, that's, you like that. He's continuing to, you called the rise meteoric. It truly is. And we should be fair and say that there is a risk to that. You know, I mean, with experience comes respect. With experience comes experience. Like, you know, you get older, you see things and you see patterns and you recognize those patterns. And then you try not to make some mistakes that you made earlier. Like, I'm sure a 50-year-old is going to come at it from a different perspective because they made mistakes when they were 20, 30, 40, that they then come to realize, all right, I'm not going to try to make that mistake again. And so there is some risk involved. But everything that I read about Peterson is that this guy just keeps notes on everything. Like, he's just someone that is dogged in terms of his ambition, but he matches that with his work ethic. And so I think, you know, if you're going to give someone of that age this much responsibility, let it be a guy that older people like Sean Marks have that kind of quote about.
So 2 more things before we can end it. One, the second bullet point, Hornets hire a new Mitch. I don't know if people would be a fan of that. I don't think you would be a fan of that if they hired a new Mitch, but they have a new decision maker.
Yeah. And well, just really quickly, that was me.
Point.
I don't have much room in the bullet point on YouTube. And so I was trying to go hire a new GM, but that didn't feel right because I don't think he's going to be a GM. What will be an interesting conversation to have if this occurs, and what we kind of did with the Buzz Peterson talk is, if they allow him, will Jeff Peterson bring on a GM? Because traditionally, teams more and more now are splitting up roles. They are having the guy that answers to the guy. And so is Jeff Peterson going to say, no, I want all control, I want to do everything? Or is he going to say, all right, I'm going to work on this aspect of the business, you know, and you're going to come in and be my GM? So that will be interesting, but I couldn't decide, do I type in like head of basketball operations, but that was too long. So I just got, you know, breaking news. We're trying to get on the air really quickly, and I just went, Hornets hire a new Mitch.
No, I like it. I still like it. It's just I don't think people would like that. It's the exact opposite of Mitch Kupchak, who was very experienced, who had championships, who was very old. And here is Jeff Peterson at 35. So, I mean, what? Mitch is like 70, I think. Is he 70? I think he might be right at 70. So literally half the age of what Mitch Kupchak is. Yeah, right. You brought up that other point about hiring somebody else here. Maybe we keep that Jake Madison interview. What about that?
Okay. Yeah, don't delete it. All right, I'll keep it.
So if Rick Schnall and Gabe Plotkin are doing this weird 5 years, I'm in charge, 5 years, you're in charge, and basically it's a duo relationship in the meantime, then what if you continue to go after Trajan Langdon, who, as we just talked about earlier in the first segment, those two have a tie together at least, where Langdon left the Nets and then they hired Peterson. Langdon leaves the Nets for the Pelicans job and then Peterson comes over. Look, if Langdon is already heard by the Pelicans with Griffin, it would be tough. But if they're willing to shell out that kind of money, then maybe those two guys work together and just dominate the league as young execs trying to figure out what the Charlotte Hornets can become down the line.
It's a nice thought, a dream team front office.
I'm going to put it out there just to say that we talked about it. Yeah,
that's good. I appreciate it. The problem with it is that if you're Trajan Langdon, you want the top job, and you're now going to be hired by someone who's 36 years old. This guy, if he's successful,
35 years.
35. Yeah. Oh my God. I think, am I 36 or 37? I don't know. I have to ask producer Katie.
I think you're 36. I think that's right.
Okay. Yeah, I'll be 37 this year. Okay. So, oh God, facing my own mortality. I've already done that. When you have a baby, you face your own mortality. Here I am again. We've got a baby in the executive front office now, and now I'm facing my own mortality again.
Now it's we have a baby, Doug. It's no longer I have a baby. Now it's we have a baby.
That's right. We have a baby GM. So if you're Langdon, if you're successful, if you do the best job, you're keeping a guy who's going to have that seat forever. There's no bigger seat. So that would be tough for Langdon. I think if they do hire a GM, they would look at somebody who might be sort of towards the end of their career, somebody that's been there and done that, somebody that wouldn't want that top job, or maybe has already had the top. Oh, God, they're going to hire Mitch as GM. Oh,
or it's just Mitch as an advisor, or it's just Mitch.
We're going to hire a new Mitch and an old Mitch. Oh, God. The advisory role is just going to be GM. That's what it's going to be.
That's right. All right. That'll do it for a new GM edition of Locked On Hornets. Thanks for making us your first listen. Jeff Peterson, now a part of the family. We'll make sure we put this anywhere you get your podcast. You can check us out on YouTube. Remember to go get us there. Notifications, subscribe, all that good stuff. And then we'll be back with you tomorrow to give you more information as we come with more info, as people are starting to put it out there in the universe, because we need all we can. We need all we can get. So we'll talk about it a little bit more. Have a great rest of your day. We'll be back with you tomorrow.